Julie, welcome to the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so good to meet you.
Matthew and Richard, it's so great to travel across the Pacific Ocean to be with you.
Yes, I feel like I'm there, and I've traveled without the jet lag. It's fantastic.
So, Julie, as I've been looking through your history of writing, it's just so fascinating. And I so maybe we can touch on just a little bit of the history of the books that you've written, because there's a bit of a biography in that as well.
Absolutely. So I just have to say hello, Australia. I've been to you a couple of times, and I love you, and I love who you are, and I'm delighted to be here. I am a Black biracial American, 54 years old, and I came into this world wanting to help people. I think my work, I'm in my third career, but what unites everything is I have a deep and abiding interest in trying to ensure that all of us make it. It's not a savior complex. It comes from a place of, I have been the outsider, and I get physical pain at the thought of other people being outsiders. So I'm trying to do my tiny little part to help. My books are How to Raise an Adult on the Harm of Overparenting, or what we call helicopter parenting. I'm not a parenting expert. I wrote that book because I was a university dean, really fiercely advocating for the right of the 18 to 22-year-olds on my campus to have agency, to have a chance to try, maybe to fall, bounce back, and so on. That book is a response to the problem of helicopter parenting, but it's in furtherance of young people thriving. My second book is a memoir on being Black and biracial in white spaces in the United States, and dealing with racism and microaggressions, and feeling like that outsider and loathing myself despite being outwardly successful, ultimately coming to self-love by working with a coach and a therapist and so on, to really unpack all of those embedded notions about my lack of worth that were coming from society that I believed, and I really had to stare in the face of, name, tame it, and move on. I wrote a foreword to the book Writing Memoir. I'm very interested in memoir and all of us telling the truth of our experience as much as we can bear it. So I've got a short a book of writing prompts out with the San Francisco Writers Grotto. And my newest book, Your Turn, How to Be an Adult, is a compassionate love letter. It's a love letter to anybody who fears they can't be an adult. That plaintive cry was first uttered by some millennials many years ago. And this is a response to that. I'm not critiquing them. I don't think it's the fault of an entire generation. For some reason, they don't feel prepared to step into this natural stage of life we all enter if we survive childhood. So Your Turn is me rooting for them. Its narrative voice is very close, very friendly, very frank, but fundamentally believing in their right and ability to make it in this one wild and precious life.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, all these things, Julie, and we're fortunate to have a fairly international sort of exposure, experience. My sister actually moved to Italy, or went on a trip and never came home, and married an Italian. So she's been there for 50, 60 years, or some horrendous. Don't tell her I told you that many years. But and so we've got relatives there. We've made some fantastic friends. I actually just had an email come in from a beautiful psychiatrist who does recovery work with addicts in Egypt, and we've known each other now for 20 years or so. And then I do a lot of work in India. And what I'm just sort of getting at is painting that little picture of what I do find in America is that there is a particular version. And some of the versions of the story are particularly harsh. Some are much less harsh. Certainly, the Black and biracial story is very harsh. It's not terribly pleasant here in Australia. We still have a lot to do, but I think we've bitten the bullet of the fact that it all has to stop. I think We've kind of bitten that bullet. Mm-hmm. Now we're just trying to figure out how the hell we do it. So these aspects of what to fight for, because I would like to say fight for is what I hear you're talking about, rather than fighting against. This feeling of waking up in the morning and going, I wonder what this implicit sense of I mean, Aronson and Steele talked about this in the mid-90s with their Stereotype Threat, and how they showed that you could actually impact the way people's brains functioned. You could impact the IQ results of university students if you just gave them these sort of threat. This sort of aspect, is this what you're embracing, or is this what you can not embrace? Just simply, it's in your fibers, it's in your being.
I guess it's both. It's in my fibers, and I also care to lean into it and embrace it. Look, Claude Steele is someone I know. I love the fact that you just mentioned him. He's been a professor at Stanford for decades. He's the person who labeled and named Stereotype Threat. When I was experiencing it as an adolescent and young adult, I hadn't yet read his work. I think he was in the process of really labeling that work as I was growing up. But I am certainly Exhibit A for Stereotype Threat. When we are members of groups about which negative stereotypes are held, we're reminded of the stereotype, we can really wither and underperform. It's like the stereotype becomes heaped upon us, and it's this weight that we really have to work hard to release ourselves from. And yet I am also an example of the fact that it is possible by sitting with somebody I trusted and opening up and saying, at 39, I hated being Black. As a child and young adult, I was afraid of Black people because of what I'd learned from the media. And I just wanted to be what white people valued. I said those 3 very painful, deeply shameful things to my coach, my professional coach, and thought I was the worst person on the planet, the only person who had ever felt that way. I would come to learn that, no, that happens to people. But in the instant I released it, it was like I released the vice grip that these stereotypical negative thoughts were holding on my psyche. So to name it is to tame it is the shorthand. And I learned that that's true. Literally the next day, I was infused with this self-acceptance, self-love for myself, for my people, for brown people and Black people more broadly. And so my life has shown me that we can undo these implicit biases we have against ourselves when we're members of groups that have been targeted or marginalized.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah, my daughter does a lot of work. She's doing a lot of work now in the domestic violence area, having a lot of impact. It's really, she's actually educating magistrates, which is a really, really, really good thing. And it is this the principle of it. Of the impact, of the imposition, of the unfelt, of the unknown weight. I mean, we almost go back to the principle, Plato's allegory of the cave, of the being chained, unknowingly chained, and living by the shadow dance on the wall, and that fundamental principle then applies almost everywhere, with different levels of weight, with different levels of the nature of what's on the wall. So, as you say, that very, very unpleasant thing of I feel embarrassed to be Black, and we've seen these things with children as old as 3 and 4 with dolls, and picking I relate to the Black doll, but I want to be the white doll, and so many of these things, the blue eye, brown eye experiments of Jane Elliott. But then this, I think, the principle of the unseen chains permeate as a generalized principle. And so just rolling that round to this other talk that you're having about parenting, about being adults, about taking that mantle, that it's to me, I keep looking at the wall in Plato's cave. What are the shadow dance? What are the puppeteers deluding people into believing or not having confidence in? So can we shift a little bit now to this adult?
I love this. Wow. I love the segue you're making. I love the insight you have and the connections you're making. Yeah. So what's dancing on the wall for parents?
Yeah.
Well, in my society, in my community, I'm in Silicon Valley, Northern California. very similar in a lot of ways to Sydney and Melbourne. I don't know about Brisbane, but probably, I don't know, Perth. There's this sense that to be a good parent in this modern era is to micromanage one's child's every moment, that the measure of worth as a parent is to have done everything for our child. Trouble is, as you well know in the field of psychotherapy, if a human is acted upon constantly, they can develop a learned helplessness. They learn that my actions don't lead to any outcomes. Life happens anyway. Life is happening to me, for me, around me. Their agency is diminished. Their resilience is diminished. Frankly, that's why I've written Your Turn, How to Be an Adult, for those young adults who are chronologically adult, but nowhere near as capable or as confident in their own capacity as you were and I was at their age, because in the main, they've been overparented. And of course, parents didn't intend to harm their kids. They thought they were doing what they were supposed to, right? Mm-hmm. That's the misinformation. That's what's dancing on the wall. Do every little thing for your child and they'll be fine. No, do every little thing. You'll feel good about yourself because you feel accomplished. Your kid is helpless.
Julie, historically, when did this start to happen? Because I've certainly heard from a lot of young adults that they don't feel like they're adults. Right. So is there a point where this micromanaging really kicked in?
Yeah, well, this is sort of a slow moving tidal wave, and we saw it hit the universities in the early 2000s. The first kids to have the first play date in the United States, at least 1984, were the first university students to come to college with kids. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
You're right.
We can retape that. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The first kids to have the first play date in 1984 were the first university students to come to university with parents who couldn't let go, who wanted to argue with the professor about a grade, who wanted to register their air quotes child for class, even though that child could be serving in the military. Their child, they thought, needed help registering for class. So the infantilization of young adults was happening. It was happening to children. It carried over to university. And then they grew up and went on into the working world. And now those people who were so badly overparented are in their late 30s. And they are the millennial generation. Not all of them, but these behaviors began when they were little, which was the late 80s.
Late 80s. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really difficult, I think, the ease of this problem occurring, blurring across that line, because as a parent, you want your child to feel care, to feel loved, and you want your child to exist in a framework of safety. But it just, all these things, and I think particularly in America, the way it happened in Italy, we could talk about later, was slightly different in the fact that it was a much more of a male dominant society, male privilege demand. And my sadly, my niece suicided in her early 20s because the world was not possible. But then in India, you have another thing going on with these you're born into your life. So it's, and I could see this. And what's fascinating with the American story, which you're particularly familiar with, is that the American experiment was for the power of the individual. And it failed. It has. I mean, my feeling is that it's a failed experiment, and we're now returning to this idea of interpersonal and engagement and co-creating and so on and so forth. Whereas your book is that you're nodding and shaking and I'll just let you go.
Oh, Richard! First of all, I'm so sorry that your niece took her life. That's devastating.
Very sorry.
We mustn't let those things go by in conversation without at least holding space for a moment. So I just wanted to say I noticed. I say it in my conversations to maintain the honor and her presence. Right. Good for you. So male-dominated Italy, caste-dominated India. The fascinating thing about America, I was starting to shake my head because America is really at that point of, are we going to make it or are we not? And as a democracy. And you've named, I thought you were going to say what's fascinating about America and the American experiment is its diversity. Instead, you said the power of the individual. And I smiled like, yes, absolutely. Both of those things. The rugged individualist is the myth of the American. And we have seen in this, pandemic that people who take that up and really carry that as their shield and sword don't give a damn about anybody else. And that really is problematic when you have an existential threat. It's maddening. Our diversity is also theoretically something that makes us very unique. When the nations march at the Olympics, America's athletes clearly come from people from around the world. It's the most beautiful thing. It makes me cry every time I see it. And yet we are so polarized because of our differences. I think our diversity is an aspect of what's threatening our democracy, because people, when everybody looks the same in Finland, let's say, everyone can agree, yes, we're all equal. We all care about each other. Everybody's pain is our pain. In America, the Asian pain is not felt by the white folks. The Latino pain is not felt by the Black. We are these separate tribes, and America's founding narrative tries to knit us together, but that founding narrative is getting erased and smudged. And so I don't know what question is embedded in this, but I wanted to just that's what I thought in response to what you said.
The question is just a discussion, really, isn't it? We're finding ourselves in. It's curious.
So another aspect. So we've got individualism there. There's also, we've talked quite a bit about safety culture. And when I think about parents wanting to micromanage their children, I think part of the motivation is because the world is, so dangerous. We need to wrap them in cotton wool. Do you think there's some aspect there about us being overly careful?
Certainly parents would articulate it that way. Here's my retort. Mm-hmm. If the world is less safe, which it really is not, statistically, we are less violent, right? Probably we know that, right?
Stephen Pink has done some stuff on
that. Right. Yeah. Okay. But even if it was, don't we need our kids to be stronger and more capable to face what awaits them outside of our homes? If things are less safe out there, we need to be raising warriors, not fragile, weak pieces of veal who will be slaughtered by what the world brings to them. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say as well, the most loving thing is not to parent for the protectiveness of today. Oh, I don't want you to catch your finger in the drawer. Oh, I don't want you to have a boo-boo at the playground. The most loving way to parent is to parent for tomorrow. Tomorrow meaning, metaphorically, the day when I will not be here to hold your hand, prevent your fall. The most loving thing is to teach you, my child, in age-appropriate ways at every stage, how to use good judgment, how to protect yourself, how to make good decisions, how to bounce back when you have been knocked down. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we've forgotten how to do. And that's really what animates my first book, How to Raise an Adult.
Yeah. So this is resilience building, which we've had a number of conversations as well on this podcast about building resilience. And it does seem from those that we've spoken to that we're not very good at that, in this generation.
Well, it's hard to see your kid cry, fall, not win, be sad. And so we've decided I got to curate and caretake to make sure none of those things happen. But psychologically speaking, it's as if we're in the driver's side seat of their life and they're forever strapped into the car seat. Just sort of taken places by us. So it's this short-term gain we achieve in the most lovingly intended way, but the long-term pain is the undermining of agency and resilience. I mean, yes, you mentioned resilience, but it's also, they don't have the skills. If we've cut their meat throughout their childhood, they can't.
They don't know how to do it.
They lack the manual dexterity, and then they're embarrassed because they're out with people their own age or a job interview, and they can't properly cut a piece of chicken.
Yeah.
But resilience is the skills, is what I'm saying. It's more than, there's certainly some temperament in there and there's some attachment nature to it. But resilience is what I call responsibility, which is response ability. And I had the most wonderful realization a little bit later in my life, because we had a big tall tree. Well, when I'm 7 years old, it seems tall, but I think it was probably 30 feet tall. And I often climb in that tree. I loved climbing in that tree. It was a fabulous tree, a big old, lots of branches and things. But my mother, I don't know, she had just some sort of anal retentiveness about the lawn. And she would rake every time I was in that tree, she'd be out raking that lawn and there were no leaves on it. And of course,
she's watching out for you.
She was out there. She said, okay, he's probably going to fall, but I'll kind of just catch him so we break as few bones as possible. But I was never given the thing, don't climb that tree. Be careful while you're in that tree. I thought my mother was an idiot trying to rake the lawn.
Isn't that lovely? It's a lovely example. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Matthew. It's a lovely example of how a parent can be present without harming.
Yeah, create care.
Be there for the just in case. Without ever letting you know that she didn't think you could do it.
Yeah. And I never broke my arm, so well done.
There you go. One of the things that I find fascinating is that in popular culture, we've got these movies, I don't know, superheroes, I don't have anyone in particular, where, the individual, learns to be resilient through a struggle. There's no mummy there holding hands and, but these are the sort of the superheroes of the culture, and yet we're not seeing that reflected in the culture of raising adults.
Are we training these kids living vicariously the power being, but remaining the less capable being?
I don't know. It's like you sit back passively and you watch the superhero, learn through adversity and, overcome. And yet we don't do that in our own lives. I don't know. Julie, have you got any thoughts along those lines?
No, absolutely. I was going to add simply that in literature, in English language literature, which is what I'm familiar with, often the protagonist is an orphan child who's right. So without all of that, what do they make of themselves? And, there's something to that. None of us is advocating for children to be orphans, but it is in the absence of tremendous caretaking, in the presence of the imperative to figure it out, that we do. And then we feel the psychological boost. We get the buzz, the high of, I took care of business. I handled that. There's a satisfaction that we feel psychologically. And here's where I'm practicing psychology without a license. Like, I'm a lawyer who became a university dean. I don't have a degree in this topic, but I know, because I felt it, right? I get a psychological hit when I accomplish something. And it doesn't have to be, I won the biggest race in life. It's not, I had a challenge on my hand. I handled it. I feel good.
Yep. Yes, I talk a lot about the danger of what I call the winner-loser world, the thing as in the sense of externally evaluated winning and losing, as different from what you were just talking about there, that internal response of succeeding, of achieving more of yourself, the most of yourself. And that has certainly been lost in cultures where external achievement is the only way that you can be valued. And America has a great deal of that, although they keep fighting against it. And you get that interesting juxtaposition with a place like India, where you really close the parameters, you minimize the parameters, and you become the best of your caste. I'm not sure how extraordinary the changes there. I have many difficult conversations with some of my Indian friends.
Yeah. All right. So where do we want to take this? So, Julie, have you got some stories? Everyone loves a story about some transformational change that's happened with some young people turning into adults, or?
Yeah, absolutely. There are two guys that are coming to mind. So let me just say, as a matter of craft, my new book, Your Turn, is part memoir, my experience growing up, lessons I learned the hard way that I'm not ashamed to put on the page. Some of those handy self-help lists that publishers and media like. But then every chapter concludes with profiles of over 30 individuals I went and found. Just going back to this notion of how important it is that we all undo the biases against us that we all come to a place of knowing we matter. I'm an author that includes people from all walks of life in my self-help pages because I want every reader to know I had you in mind when I wrote this. So that's why I had to bring in the stories of lots of other people, and two guys who come to mind in the relationships chapter. So, we know that the research shows it's the quality of our relationships at 50 that determines whether we live a long and healthy life, more so than our cholesterol level at 50. And so I have a whole chapter called Start Talking to Strangers. Humans are key to your survival, trying to counteract that childhood imperative, don't talk to strangers, which is an overbroad, absurd rule. Yeah. And in that chapter, I have two guys who are kind of juxtaposed. One is Akshay. He's the child of Indian immigrants, high achieving academically, expected to go to med school, and he did. A Hindu family. And when he's 22 and graduating from college, he comes to terms with the fact that he's gay. And he lets his family know. He's an identical twin, by the way. So he's got a twin brother doing the exact same thing at a different university, both pre-med. And his parents won't accept it. And the long and short of it is, he soldiers on, goes to med school, finds a med school that has a thriving queer community so he can begin to explore that identity in a way that's meaningful to him. And his parents reject it. For 10 years, they ask him, when are you going to marry a nice girl? They just will not see him. And they become estranged. Okay, so I'm going to hold that out there. The other story is Joe, a white guy in Texas who is really talented at the theater. He's a theater director. He studies it at SMU in Dallas. He goes out into the world to make his way in the arts. He goes to get his master's degree in theater. And his father's a corporate guy who refuses to see his son, and as he is, refuses to value theater as a pursuit. And where these stories end up is Akshay at 32 finally reaches out to his parents and says, look, I'd love for you to know who I am. I'd love to know who you are. I don't know how much time we have left together on this planet, but I really, and within hours, Akshay's parents were like, we love you. We accept you. Like they had in their 10 years of estrangement done the work. Joe at 32, his father invited him to come see his thesis on the stage, this wonderful family dynamic playing out on the stage that Joe directed. And his father said, this was amazing. This is great. But when are you going to get a real job?
Yeah.
And Joe is delighted to be permanently estranged from his dad until his dad, if and when his dad comes around to accept him. And the reason these stories are in my book is I am rooting for Akshay and Joe. I am rooting for the individual to figure out, who are you? What do you know to be true about yourself? What are you good at? What do you love? Where do you find belonging? Go in those directions, and to heck with anyone who tries to stand in your way.
Yeah. This beautiful thing of understanding that the nature of your individuality, of your uniqueness, its power is what that uniqueness creates when it combines and integrates and engages with another uniqueness, as different from an isolatedness. And this was the era of that I think flows through. If I isolate my child from the dangers, if I isolate them, literally, as you say, helicopter. What's the one that's even worse than that? They were saying the curling parent.
Yes,
who's running around with a broom.
Right.
Micro adjusting
and warming the ice.
And warming the ice. Just so we can move. And this is such a powerful discussion, and I would suggest that your book is like the breath that is blowing on the forest of all these stories. That take your book and Matt and I, we talk a lot about curiosity and possibility, and that every piece of information is a springboard. And I'm just hearing, each page, those stories. I'm wanting people to read those stories and not go, oh, I know it now. I'm sure you're wanting it too.
I love that you're honing in on the stories. It really was the most joyful part of writing this book. I couldn't write it I signed a contract to write it and failed for 3 years because I thought, who the hell am I to write a book telling other people how to live their entire adulthood? And then I realized I've had some years, I've had some experiences. I can be humble, I can be curious, I can be respectful of all walks of life, but I need to join other people into the telling, which I did. you asked for a favorite story, and the one I should have told you about is Sean's story. Sean closes the book. Chapter 13 is just called Above All Else, Keep Going. I was invited to do a podcast in Australia with a guy named Sean. I said, a parenting podcast. I said yes, because few men are in the parenting space. And I love Australia. I was like, great, I'm being on an Australia podcast. Here I am again. Yeah, and we had a great convo. He was so mature and so wise and had such great insight, really, a very different podcast. And at the end, I said, forgive me, I don't mean to sound paternalistic, but how old are you? You sound so wise, but you must be like 30. He's like, I'm 23.
Wow.
Well, he had told me the story of having had a baby. He had a baby who was 2. So that means he had the baby at 21. I said, Sean, okay, will you be I need to interview you now for my book, because I want the story of what it's like to discover at 21 that you and your partner are unexpectedly expecting. And you've got all of this wisdom now. So you're like, he closes out the book because they made that decision. Like, all right, life has thrown us this curveball. We're going to go figure that out, and we're going to be the best parents we can, and we're going to make our own way. And the language Sean uses is full of such delight about what he has learned from coming into fatherhood young, what he is learning from this lovely little boy, Oscar, having to stand up to his own dad, Sean's dad, who is an alcoholic, having to draw that boundary and say, Dad, I grew up this way. I'm not letting my son be exposed to those behaviors. So you got 2 choices: stay as you are or get sober. If you're sober, you are welcome into my son's life. And his dad got sober for a while and then fell off the wagon. And Sean has drawn that line with such grace and strength. And I think that story shows when you become the adult, look, you get to decide. You get to decide if you want to have that problematic father in your life and in what respect. You are no longer a dog on a leash being led through life by a parent of whatever well-meaning or not. You are your own individual. And boy, does Sean's story illustrate that point.
And you said to him, it's your turn.
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. So as we sort of round out this conversation, Julia, is there anything that you'd like to sort of leave our listeners with?
Sure. To any listener listening who's felt something, be curious about what came up for you as Matthew, Richard, and I spoke. Whatever arose in your body and your mind and your spirit, that's a clue from you to you that something we said matters. So take that forward. I will add, I am rooting for all of us to make it. I deeply believe in the power of each individual, almost regardless of initial circumstance, although I realize some people start out life in really dire straits. I do believe we have the right and the ability to make our way. And my job is to just try to help. So that's what I'm about in all of my books, and particularly Your Turn.
That's beautiful. That contribution to the co-creative experience and excitement. And I noticed you just took a little bit of delight at something I said, and I took a bit of delight as well. I just want to sort of say it again. It's the breath, the individual's breath blowing on the forest of possibility. And that is the rattle and shake that makes all our work worthwhile. I'm very happy for people to tell me, how brilliant, Matt and I are, and with our book. But how brilliant are you? Because of what we've said and where it takes you and your stories. I feel like I can become an adult now.
I think you can, Richard. It's up to you. It's up to you, right? Yes. Yes, you are. Gentlemen, thank you for having me. What a delightful conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Take care now.
Yeah, okay. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.